never chose the dark. He never asked for the dead. But when the three brothers divided the universe, he drew the shortest lot. Welcome to Shadow Folklore. Today, Hades. The lot was shortest, not because it was cursed, but because someone had to take it. Picture the moment. Three brothers standing in the rubble of their father's kingdom. The Titan War finally over. The old order shattered. Zeus holds three tokens: sky, sea, underworld. They draw. Zeus pulls the heavens and claims dominion over all that breathes. Poseidon draws the oceans, vast and blue and roaring with life. Hades reaches into the urn last, and his fingers close around what remains. The realm beneath, the kingdom of shades, the place where all stories end but never quite finish. He does not rage, he does not weep. He simply turns and descends. The earth closes over him like a wound that never heals. And for the next 3,000 years, humanity will mistake his silence for malice, his duty for cruelty, his absence for evil. In the cool shadows beneath the world, where rivers run backward and memory becomes liquid, where the dead outnumber the living by incalculable measure, one god sits on a throne he never wanted, and administers the only law that cannot be broken, that all things end and all debts come due. His name was so feared that the ancient Greeks would not speak it aloud. They called him the Wealthy One, the Unseen One, the host of many, but we know him as Hades. The Greeks who first named him lived in a world defined by stone and sun and the narrow margin between survival and starvation. The landscape of the Hellenic Bronze Age, rocky hillsides terraced for olives, wind-scoured islands breaking the Aegean's back, mountains that rose sheer and unforgiving from coastal plains, was not gentle. It was a world where the earth took as much as it gave. Crops failed, ships sank, children died young. The line between the living and the dead was not a metaphor, but a daily physical reality, as close as the graves cut into bedrock just beyond the village boundary, as immediate as the funeral pyres that burned on hillsides and sent ash drifting down into the wheat fields below. From this landscape emerged a cosmology that was ruthlessly honest about mortality. The Greeks of the archaic and classical periods did not believe in bodily resurrection. They did not imagine a paradise where the righteous would walk in gardens forever, did not conceive of hells tailored to specific sins. Instead, they imagined the underworld, a vast subterranean kingdom where the dead existed in a state of diminished consciousness, drinking from rivers that erased memory, wandering through fields of asphodel that stretched grey and endless under a sunless sky. It was not punishment, it was simply the place where life was not. And presiding over this kingdom, maintaining its borders, ensuring that the dead stayed dead and the natural order remained intact, was Hades. His role in the Greek pantheon was unique. Unlike Zeus, who ruled from Olympus and involved himself constantly in mortal affairs, seducing, punishing, rewarding, meddling, Hades remained in his realm. He did not ascend to attend the feasts of the gods. He did not father half mortal children or walk disguised among humanity. He stayed below, invisible, performing the one task that all the other gods were too afraid or too proud to claim. He governed death, not as a reaper, not as a punisher, but as an administrator. In the Greek moral universe, Hades was not evil, and necessity, in Greek thought, was the highest law. Older than Zeus, stronger than fate, inevitable as the seasons. The ancient Greeks understood that the world required balance. The bright, chaotic energy of Zeus, his lightning, his appetites, his endless transformations, had to be counterweighted by something darker, colder, more permanent. Hades was that counterweight. Where Zeus represented life's wild possibilities, Hades represented its final certainty. Where Zeus broke oaths and seduced and schemed, Hades kept his word with absolute precision. There are no myths of Hades lying. There are no stories of him breaking a vow. When Orpheus descended into the underworld to retrieve his wife Eurydice, Hades made a bargain. The musician could lead her back to the surface, but he must not look back until they reached sunlight. Orpheus looked back. Eurydice vanished. Hades did not gloat or punish further. The terms had been clear. The oath binding and the law of his kingdom was that the dead do not return. The tragedy was not Hades' cruelty, it was Orpheus's doubt, and the unbending nature of death itself. In this sense, Hades was the most Greek of all the gods. He embodied ananke, necessity, compulsion, the force that even gods cannot resist. He was the god of limits in a pantheon obsessed with transgression. His kingdom was the one place Zeus could not storm, where Poseidon's earthquakes could not reach, where Athena's wisdom offered no advantage. The dead came to Hades not because he hunted them, but because they could go nowhere else. His realm was not a torture chamber, but a cosmic holding pattern, a vast waiting room where souls lingered in a grey half-existence, neither suffering nor rejoicing, simply being in the aftermath of being. The Greeks' relationship with death was complicated by their understanding of honor and glory. A warrior who died nobly in battle like Achilles might be granted a place in the Elysian fields, a section of the underworld reserved for heroes and the specially favored. But even there, even in that paradise, the dead were diminished. When Odysseus travels to the underworld in Homer's Odyssey, he meets the shade of Achilles, who tells him, "I would rather be a living slave to a landless man than king of all the dead." Even the greatest hero preferred the worst life to the best death. This was the Greek terror. Not that the afterlife would be torturous, but that it would be less vivid, less real, less alive. And Hades ruled that lessness with perfect, inflexible justice. Hades himself is rarely described in physical detail in the earliest sources. Homer does not give him a face. Hesiod's Theogony, written in the 8th century BCE, identifies him as one of the 6 children of Cronus and Rhea, swallowed by his father at birth, along with his siblings, later regurgitated when Zeus forced Cronus to vomit up his offspring. But Hesiod offers little description of Hades' appearance or temperament. He is simply present. The third brother, the Lord of the Unseen. Later sources, playwrights, poets, vase painters, begin to fill in the image. A bearded man, mature but not elderly, often seated on a throne, holding a scepter or a key. Sometimes he wears a helm of darkness, the Kyne, which renders him invisible. But compared to Zeus with his thunderbolt, or Poseidon with his trident, or Apollo with his lyre, Hades' iconography is sparse. He does not need symbols of power. Is the grave itself. Different city, states, and different eras emphasize different aspects of his nature. In some traditions, he was called Pluton, the wealthy one, because all the mineral riches of the earth, the gold and silver and gems, lay in his domain. In the Eleusinian mysteries, the secret religious rites practiced near Athens for nearly 2,000 years, Hades played a central role not as a figure of dread, but as a guarantor of agricultural fertility. The mysteries taught that death and rebirth were linked, that the seed buried in the earth would rise again, that Persephone's annual descent and return mirrored the cycle of planting and harvest. In this context, Hades was not the enemy of life, but its silent partner, the force that made regeneration possible. Other epithets multiplied his complexity. He was called Eubulos, the good counselor. He was Polydegmon, the host of many. He was Stygios, the hateful, but also Aegisandros, leader of the people, suggesting not tyranny but guidance. These names were not contradictions. They were attempts to capture something the Greeks understood intuitively, that the god of death could not be simple, could not be purely malevolent, because death itself was woven into the fabric of existence. To curse Hades was to curse the natural order, to fear him, to threshold about, and in a world as uncertain as ancient Greece, where plague could wipe out a city, where invaders could burn your crops, where a storm could sink your ship between one island and the next, Hades offered something almost like comfort. The assurance that there was a place for everyone, that no soul would be lost, that the dead had a home even if that home was dark. But the most enduring story about Hades, the one that has defined his reputation for millennia, is also the most misunderstood: the abduction of Persephone. The standard version, taught in schools and retold in children's books, is simple and disturbing. Persephone, the maiden daughter of Demeter, goddess of the harvest, is picking flowers in a meadow. The earth splits open. Hades emerges in a chariot drawn by black horses, seizes Persephone, and drags her down into the underworld to be his queen. Demeter, mad with grief, withholds the harvest and plunges the world into famine, until Zeus negotiates a compromise. Persephone will spend part of the year in the underworld with Hades, and part of the year above ground with her mother. This myth explains the seasons: winter when Persephone is below, spring and summer when she returns. It is also, in most modern retellings, framed as a straightforward kidnapping. Hades is the villain, Persephone the victim, and the marriage itself an act of violence. The term rape of Persephone appears in older translations, using rape in its archaic sense of abduction or seizure. But the word's modern connotations have colored every contemporary reading of the myth. Hades becomes a predator. Persephone becomes a stolen bride. The story is read as a parable of male violence and female suffering. The ancient sources tell a stranger. He first asks Zeus, Persephone's father, for permission to marry her. Zeus agrees, but secretly, knowing Demeter will never consent. Hades then orchestrates the abduction, bursting through the earth at the moment when Persephone reaches for a narcissus flower so beautiful. It was clearly a lure. The earth closes over them. Demeter searches for 9 days and nights, hearing her daughter's cries but unable to find her. Finally, the sun god Helios, who sees everything, tells Demeter the truth. Persephone is in the underworld, married to Hades, and Zeus sanctioned it. Demeter's rage is directed not at Hades but at Zeus. She abandons Olympus, disguises herself as an old woman, and wanders the earth. When she withholds the harvest, it is not to punish Hades, it is to punish Zeus, to force him to acknowledge that his authority has limits, that a mother's grief can unmake the world. Eventually Zeus relents. He sends Hermes to the underworld to retrieve Persephone. Hades agrees to let her go, but first he offers her a pomegranate seed. She eats it. This single act binds her to the underworld. The ancient logic is clear: to eat the food of the dead is to become, in part, one of the dead. Persephone must return to Hades for 4 months each year, and the compromise is struck. Here is where the ambiguity deepens. Did Hades trick Persephone into eating the seed, knowing it would bind her, or did Persephone eat it knowingly, choosing to tie herself to the underworld because, in the days or weeks or months she spent there, she had found something: power, autonomy, a role no other goddess possessed? The hymn does not say. Later writers elaborated. Some insisted Hades forced the seed into her mouth. Others suggested Persephone took it willingly, that she understood the pomegranate's significance and chose queenship in the underworld over eternal maidenhood in her mother's shadow. Both readings exist in the tradition, and what is clear is that Persephone's role in the underworld is not passive. She is not a prisoner locked in a tower. In later myths, she appears as a powerful, even fearsome figure in her own right. When the hero Theseus and his friend Pirithous attempt to kidnap Persephone from Hades' realm, it is Hades who traps them, but Persephone who does not intervene to free them. When the musician Orpheus descends to retrieve Eurydice, it is Persephone, as much as Hades, who listens to his song and grants his request. In some accounts, it is Persephone who judges the dead alongside her husband, wielding authority over souls with the same uncompromising finality. She is called Kore, the maiden, when she walks the earth. But in the underworld, she is called Persephone, the bringer of destruction, the queen of the dead. Her transformation is not from innocence to corruption, but from potential to actualization. She moves from her mother's realm, where she was a daughter, a symbol of fertility, a promise, to her own realm, where she is sovereign, where she rules the dead with a scepter as heavy as her husband's. The marriage to Hades, whether it began as abduction or not, becomes something more complicated. A passage into power, a claim to dominion that no other goddess possessed. This is not to romanticize the story or erase its darker elements. The ancient Greeks themselves were uneasy with the myth. The violence of the abduction is undeniable in the earliest texts, but the story's long afterlife suggests it resonated for reasons beyond simple victimhood. Persephone's dual nature, above and below, maiden and queen, bringer of spring and ruler of the dead, made her a figure of transition, of thresholds, of the terrifying and exhilarating possibilities that exist at the boundary between life and death. She was not a cautionary tale about stolen innocence. She was a story about transformation that costs everything and grants everything in return. And Hades, in this reading, is not the architect of her suffering, but her partner in sovereignty. He does not dominate her. He does not diminish her. Instead, he shares with her the only power that matters in the Greek cosmos, the power to decide who crosses the final boundary and who does not. Together, they rule the one kingdom that will outlast all others. Olympus may fall, the earth may crack, the seas may dry up, but the underworld endures, and its king and queen endure with it. The geography of the Greek underworld is as precise and detailed as any map of the living world, though its landmarks are rivers and plains of the dead, rather than mountains and cities. The boundary between life and death is the river Styx. Its name means hatred or shuddering cold, and it is the most famous of the underworld's 5 rivers. The Styx is not merely a barrier, it is a cosmic oath. When the gods swear by the Styx, the oath is unbreakable. Even Zeus cannot violate it. The river's power is older than the Olympians, a remnant of the primordial forces that existed before the Titans, before the world took its current shape. To cross the Styx is to leave the realm of possibility and enter the realm of certainty. The dead are ferried across by Charon, the skeletal boatman who demands payment, traditionally a coin, an obol placed under the tongue of the corpse. Those who cannot pay are said to wander the near shore for 100 years, shades without passage, neither alive nor fully dead. Beyond the Styx lie 4 other rivers, each with its own nature. The Acheron is the river of woe, and some traditions claim it is the primary boundary rather than the Styx. The Lethe is the river of forgetfulness. The dead drink from it and their memories dissolve, their earthly lives becoming dim and distant until nothing remains but a vague sense of having once been. The Phlegethon is the river of fire, boiling and impassable surrounding Tartarus, the deepest pit of the underworld. And the Cocytus is the river of lamentation, where the shades of the unburied gather and weep, unable to complete their journey until their bodies receive proper rites. Once across the rivers, the dead encounter Cerberus, the 3-headed hound of Hades. Cerberus is not merely a guard dog, he is a boundary keeper, a liminal creature whose 3 heads may represent past, present, and future, or birth, life, and death. His task is not to keep the living out, though he does that with savage. The Greeks understood that the danger of death was not intrusion from outside, but escape from within. The dead must stay dead. The natural order depends on it. Cerberus ensures that order holds. Beyond Cerberus lies the judgment. In the earliest myths, there is no universal judgment. The dead simply descend into Hades' realm and wander the asphodel fields forever. But by the classical period, the idea of judgment has taken hold. 3 judges preside: Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus. All of them mortal men renowned for their wisdom and fairness in life, elevated to divine office in death. They weigh the deeds of each soul. The virtuous, the heroic, and the specially favored are sent to Elysium, a paradise within the underworld where the climate is mild. The fields are green, and the blessed spend eternity in ease. The wicked, the oath breakers, the impious are cast into Tartarus, a prison deeper than Hades' own palace, where the Titans are chained and where punishment is eternal. But most souls go neither to Elysium nor Tartarus. Most go to the asphodel fields, the vast middle realm where the ordinary dead exist in a state of diminished consciousness. They are not tortured. They are not rewarded. They simply are, shades of their former selves, drifting through grey meadows under a grey sky, drinking from the Lethe until they forget who they were, until they become nothing but the faint echo of a human life. This is the fate the Greeks feared most. Not pain, but erasure. Hades' palace stands at the center of this realm, a vast structure of black stone, its gates guarded by Cerberus, its halls filled with the quiet business of death. Here Hades sits on his throne, and here Persephone sits beside him, and from here they administer the laws that govern souls. They do not torture, they do not plead, they do not offer second chances, or bargains, or redemption. They simply uphold the order, and for 3,000 years, the question remains, is this duty a burden or a privilege? Is Hades a prisoner of his own realm, forever exiled from the sunlight and the warmth of Olympus? Or is he the only god wise enough to understand that death is not a curse, but the foundation on which life is built? The ancient Greeks believed that to die was to enter Hades' realm, and to enter his realm was to become his subject. There was no escape, no loophole, no exception. Even the gods, though immortal, feared his authority. When Demeter demanded Persephone's return, Zeus could command it, but even Zeus could not overrule the law of the pomegranate seed. When Sisyphus, the clever king, tried to cheat death by trapping Thanatos, the personification of death itself, in chains, Hades sent Ares to free Thanatos, and personally ensured that Sisyphus received the most creative punishment Tartarus could offer, rolling a boulder up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time he neared the summit. Hades did not rage. He did not gloat. He simply corrected the imbalance and returned the cosmos to its proper state. This is Hades' defining trait in the Greek sources. He is just. Not forgiving, but absolutely inflexibly just. He does not play favorites. He does not accept bribes. When Orpheus descended into the underworld to retrieve Eurydice, Hades listened to his music and wept. Even the god of the dead was moved by beauty, and he granted Orpheus' request, but only under conditions that Orpheus would fail. When Heracles was sent to capture Cerberus as his final labor, Hades allowed it. But only if Heracles could subdue the hound without weapons, by strength and courage alone. Heracles succeeded, took Cerberus to the surface, showed him to King Eurystheus, and then returned the hound to the underworld, because even the greatest hero understood that Cerberus belonged to Hades, and what belonged to Hades stayed with Hades. The Greeks did not build many temples to Hades. There were a few, a sanctuary at Elis, a grove near Pylos, but nothing on the scale of Zeus's temples at Olympia or Athena's Parthenon. The reason was simple. The dead did not need temples. They were already in Hades' realm. The living, meanwhile, were afraid to invoke him directly, fearing that speaking his name would draw his attention, that he might mistake the invocation for a summons. Instead, they used euphemisms. They called him Pluton, the giver of wealth, hoping to appease him with flattery. They called him the Unseen One, because to name him was to acknowledge his presence, and his presence meant death was near. This terror was not irrational, it was existential. Hades represented the one truth that no philosophy, no courage, no cleverness could escape. That Poseidon could be calmed, Apollo could be reasoned with, but Hades could not be bargained with, because his realm was not a punishment or a choice, it was a destination, inevitable as gravity. They feared him the way sailors fear the ocean, with respect, with caution, with the understanding that it is vast and powerful, and ultimately indifferent to human hope. Hades did not hate humanity. He did not delight in suffering. He simply presided over the place where all humans eventually would stand before him, holding nothing, stripped of wealth and status and achievement, reduced to a shade awaiting judgment in that moment. Hades would not ask what you owned or who you knew. He would ask what you did, and whether you honored the oaths you swore, and whether you lived with integrity or deceit. This is the Hades of the Greek sources. Not a devil, not a tempter, not a cosmic sadist, but a figure of such profound gravity that even gods spoke his name in whispers. He is the end of all stories, the destination of all journeys, and in the ancient Greek imagination, that made him not evil, but essential. When the Romans encountered Greek mythology, they translated it, adapted it, and in the process, began the long distortion of Hades' character. The Romans called him Pluto, a Latinized version of Pluton, emphasizing his wealth and his role as lord of the earth's mineral riches. But Roman culture, with its emphasis on strict social hierarchy and imperial order, began to reshape the underworld into something more punitive, more concerned with reward and punishment than the Greeks had been. By the time Christianity emerged in the Mediterranean world, the stage was set for a catastrophic misreading. Early Christian theologians, seeking to distinguish their faith from the pagan traditions that surrounded them, needed a devil, a cosmic adversary, a lord of evil, a figure who ruled a place of eternal torment. The Greeks had no such figure. The Titans were defeated and chained. The monsters were obstacles, not ultimate evils, and Hades was not an adversary but an administrator. Christian writers, particularly in the Latin-speaking West, began to map Christian cosmology onto Greek myth. Hades became conflated with Satan. The underworld became hell. Tartarus, the deepest pit where the wicked were punished, became the model for eternal damnation. And Hades himself, the god who presided over death with inflexible justice, became recast as the Lord of Evil, the Tempter, the enemy of God and humanity. This transformation was not immediate and not universal. Eastern Christian traditions retained more nuance, but in the popular imagination of medieval Europe, the equation was complete. Hades equals hell, equals the devil. This distortion persisted for centuries. Medieval mystery plays depicted Pluto as a demon. Renaissance paintings showed him with horns and cloven hooves. The original Greek context, Hades as a neutral, necessary force, the keeper of boundaries, the god who ensured that death was not chaos, was buried under centuries of Christian reinterpretation. But there were always dissenting voices. The Florentine poet Dante Alighieri, writing the Divine Comedy in the early 14th century, placed Hades, or rather, the classical underworld, in the first circle of his Christian hell, limbo, where the virtuous pagans dwell in a state of longing but not torment. Dante understood, perhaps better than most medieval Christians, that the Greek underworld was not a place of evil, but a place of absence. Absence of God, absence of salvation, but not absence of dignity or reason. When Dante meets the shades of Homer, Virgil, and other great poets in limbo, they are not suffering. They are simply incomplete, waiting in a place that is neither heaven nor hell, but something in between. The Renaissance brought a renewed interest in classical texts, and with it, a chance to recover Hades' original character. Humanist scholars read Homer and Hesiod in the original Greek. They studied the Homeric hymn to Demeter and the plays of Euripides. They began to see the difference between the Greek god of death and the Christian devil. But popular culture moved more slowly. The image of Hades as a villain, as a figure of malevolence, had taken root too deeply in the European imagination to be easily dislodged. In 1667, John Milton published Paradise Lost, the English epic that would define Satan for the next 3 centuries. Milton's Satan is a tragic hero, a rebel angel cast into hell, eloquent and proud and tormented. He is everything Hades was not: active, scheming, bent on revenge. But in the popular mind, the two figures began to blur. Ergo, Hades and Satan were the same. The equation already made in medieval Christianity was reinforced by one of the greatest works of English literature. The distortion continued through the Romantic period and into the Victorian era. Gothic novels and sensation fiction borrowed freely from classical myth, but always with a Christian overlay. Hades became a stock villain in retellings of the Persephone myth, the dark lord who drags an innocent maiden into his cursed realm. The possibility that Persephone might have agency, might choose power, might become something more than a victim, was erased. She was Sleeping Beauty, waiting to be rescued. He was Bluebeard, the monstrous husband. The 20th century brought film, and film brought a new set of visual cliches. In 1981, Clash of the Titans introduced a generation of viewers to Greek mythology filtered through Hollywood spectacle. The film's underworld is a place of fire and monsters, and though Hades himself does not appear, the imagery is indebted to Christian hell, flames, demons, eternal suffering. In 1997, Disney released Hercules, an animated musical that reimagined Greek mythology as a light-hearted hero's journey. The film's Hades is voiced by James Woods as a fast-talking deal, making villain with blue flames for hair and a desire to overthrow Zeus and conquer Olympus. He is charming, funny, and entirely evil, a cartoon devil with a Greek name. Disney's Hades is perhaps the most influential modern distortion of the character. For millions of viewers, especially younger audiences, this version became definitive. The god of the dead was no longer a silent, just figure presiding over an inevitable realm. He was a scheming corporate villain, a used car salesman with divine power and malicious intent. The transformation was complete. Hades, the most restrained and dutiful of the Greek gods, had become a comic book supervillain. But something began to shift in the early 21st century. A new wave of writers, many of them women, began to revisit the Persephone myth and reclaim its complexity. In 2012, the webcomic Lore Olympus by Rachel Smythe reimagined Hades and Persephone's relationship as a romance between a lonely, socially awkward god and a young goddess escaping an abusive mother. The comic is explicit about the power dynamics and the trauma involved, but it also grants both characters agency and depth. Hades is not a villain. He is a workaholic, a caretaker, a god who has spent millennia doing a thankless job and has forgotten how to live. In 2018, Madeline Miller published Circe, a retelling of Greek mythology from the perspective of the witch Circe. Though Hades is not a central character, Miller's treatment of him is respectful and nuanced. He is neither villain nor romantic hero, but a figure of cosmic necessity, doing what must be done because someone has to do it. In 2020, the video game Hades by Supergiant Games became a surprise hit, telling the story of Zagreus, son of Hades, attempting to escape the underworld. The game's Hades is stern, demanding, and emotionally distant, but the narrative gradually reveals his motivations, his sacrifices, and the burden of his role. He is not evil. He is exhausted. These modern reinterpretations have not erased Disney's fast-talking villain or Hollywood's demonic overlord, but they have created space for a more accurate, more interesting Hades to emerge. A figure shaped by duty, by isolation, by the weight of a job that never ends and never earns gratitude. They have recovered the ancient understanding that death is not a villain. It is a fact. And the god who presides over death is not a tempter or a torturer, but a guardian of the boundary that makes life meaningful. Yet, even as popular culture begins to rehabilitate Hades, the Christian distortion lingers. In casual conversation, people still say Hades when they mean hell. They still conflate the Greek underworld with eternal torment. They still imagine Hades as a figure of evil, despite 3,000 years of evidence to the contrary. The question, then, is not just what the Greeks believed about Hades, but why that belief was so thoroughly overwritten, and what it costs us to lose it. The ancient Greeks did not have a devil. They did not believe in a cosmic force of pure evil, a fallen angel bent on corrupting humanity and dragging souls into eternal damnation. Their universe was not a battleground between absolute good and absolute evil. It was a complex, morally ambiguous place where even the gods were flawed, where justice was sometimes arbitrary, and where suffering was not always punishment for sin but simply the cost of being alive. In this cosmos, Hades served a necessary function. He was not good or evil. He was inevitable. He was the god of the one thing that cannot be avoided, cannot be negotiated, cannot be cheated except temporarily and at great cost. To be mortal was to be subject to his authority. To live was to know that someday you would stand before him. This is a difficult truth for any culture to hold, but the Greeks managed it by separating death from judgment. Hades ruled the dead, but he did not decide whether you lived a good life or a bad one. That was the work of the three judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, and even their judgments were not about eternal salvation or damnation in the Christian sense. They were about distribution, where in the underworld you would spend eternity. Elysium for the heroic and virtuous, Tartarus for the wicked and impious, the asphodel fields for everyone else. Christianity changed this framework fundamentally. In Christian theology, death is not neutral. It is the consequence of sin, the punishment for Adam and Eve's disobedience in the Garden of Eden. And the afterlife is not a vast grey waiting room, but a binary destination, heaven or hell, salvation or damnation, eternal bliss or eternal suffering. There is no middle ground, no asphodel fields, where ordinary people drift in a state of diminished but not tormented existence. You are saved, or you are damned. And the Lord of the damned is Satan, the devil, the fallen angel who rebelled against God and now rules hell with the explicit goal of corrupting as many souls as possible. When Christians encountered Greek mythology, they mapped this binary cosmology onto it. Hades' underworld became hell. Tartarus, the place of punishment, became the entire realm, and Hades himself became conflated with Satan, because both were associated with the dead, both ruled underground realms, and both existed in opposition to the gods, or god of light and life. But the Greeks never saw Hades as an opponent of Zeus. He was Zeus's brother, his partner in cosmic governance. Zeus ruled the sky and the living. Poseidon ruled the sea. Hades ruled the underworld. The division of the cosmos was not a conflict but a contract. And Hades honored that contract more faithfully than I. He did not rebel. He did not scheme. He did not desire what Zeus had. He simply did his job day after day, century after century, receiving the dead and administering the laws that govern their final rest. This is the critical difference that Christian reinterpretation obscured. Hades is not a rebel. He is not a tempter. He is not even, in the Greek sense, an adversary. He is a civil servant, the administrator of a vast bureaucracy, the keeper of the natural order. His realm is not punishment but destination. To enter it is not to be damned but to be mortal, to have lived and died as all things do. Yet the conflation of Hades with Satan persisted, in part because it was useful. Christianity needed a devil, a figure to embody evil and temptation, and the Greek underworld provided a convenient template. The fire and suffering of Tartarus became the fire and suffering of Christian hell. The three-headed hound Cerberus became a demon guarding the gates of perdition, and Hades, the silent, dutiful god of death, became the lord of all wickedness, the ultimate enemy. This distortion did violence not just to Greek mythology, but to the concept of death itself. The Greeks understood death as natural and necessary, a part of the cycle of existence. To live forever would be monstrous. Even the gods, who were immortal, did not experience time the same way mortals did, and their immortality came with its own burdens and alienation. For mortals, death was the boundary that gave life meaning. It was the reason courage mattered, the reason heroism was possible, the reason love and grief and memory had weight. Without death, life would be infinite and therefore meaningless. Hades presided over that meaning. He ensured that death was not chaos, not oblivion, not arbitrary erasure. He gave the dead a place, a structure, a final rest, and he did it without cruelty, without malice, without the sadistic pleasure that Christian depictions of Satan attribute to the Lord of Hell. He did it because someone had to, and because he had drawn the shortest lot, and because he understood, better than Zeus, better than any of the other gods, that the universe required balance, and that balance required death. To lose this understanding, to replace Hades with Satan, that the god of death is not evil, that the grave is not hell, but the final democracy, the place where all humans, regardless of wealth or status or achievement, stand equal before the same judgment. Modern culture is slowly, haltingly recovering this wisdom. We see it in the recent retellings of the Persephone myth that grant both Hades and Persephone agency and complexity. We see it in the video game Hades, where the titular god is stern but not malicious, exhausted but not defeated. We see it in the growing recognition among scholars and writers that the Greek underworld was not hell, and that Hades deserves better than 3,000 years of slander. But the work is not complete. In casual speech, in popular media, in the instinctive associations that shape how we think about death, Hades is still the villain. He is still the Lord of Hell. He is still confused with Satan, with Lucifer, with every Christian devil who ever tempted a saint or tortured a sinner. The truth is simpler and stranger. Hades is not a villain. He is a god who drew the shortest lot and accepted it. He is a figure of duty and silence and inflexible justice. He is the Lord of the underworld, not because he is evil, but because death is real, and someone has to rule the dead. And in the ancient Greek imagination, that made him not the enemy of life, but its necessary counterpart, the darkness that defines the light, the end that gives the journey meaning, the boundary that makes home worth returning to. The ancient Greeks knew this. We have forgotten it, and in forgetting, we have transformed one of mythology's most complex figures into a cartoon of malevolence, a villain who never existed, and a devil who never was. It is time to remember. It is time to call Hades by his true names: the unseen one, the wealthy one, the host of many, the keeper of boundaries, the god who presided over death with the same quiet justice that his brothers denied in life. the god who kept his oaths, who ruled without cruelty, who ensured that the dead were not abandoned but received, not punished but housed, not erased but remembered. He never chose the dark, but he made it home. The modern world does not believe in Hades, but it believes in what he represented. The inevitability of death, the collapse of all ambition into dust, the final boundary that no technology can cross. We have not escaped the underworld. We have simply renamed it. Hospice, cemetery, crematorium. We have not defeated death. We have only moved it out of sight, turned it into a medical failure rather than a cosmic certainty, transformed the god's realm into a diagnosis and a prognosis. And in doing so, we have lost something the Greeks understood, that death is not the enemy. Denying death, fearing it so completely that we cannot name it or think about it. Turning away from the grave as if it were obscene rather than inevitable. These are the true horrors. The Greeks looked into the dark and said, someone must rule there. Someone must keep order. Someone must ensure that the dead are honored and the living are protected from the chaos of unbound mortality. They called that someone Hades. We have no Hades. We have only the vague, anxious sense that death is a problem to be solved, a disease to be cured, a conversation to be avoided. We have replaced the god of the underworld with euphemisms and denial, and in the process we have made death more terrifying, not less. Because at least when Hades ruled the dead, there was a structure, there was a place for every soul, there was justice and rest, and the quiet dignity of a final home. What do we offer instead? Cremation and scattering, obituaries and memorial funds. The vague hope that somehow we will live on in memory, in photographs, in the digital traces we leave behind. But memory fades, photographs yellow and crack, the internet forgets, and then what? Where do we go when even our names are lost? Hades, and we called him a villain for his trouble. The most misunderstood god in all of mythology is not misunderstood, because the sources are unclear. He is misunderstood because we need him to be a villain. We need death to have a face we can hate, a name we can curse, an enemy we can fight. We cannot accept that death is neutral, that the grave is not a punishment, but a destination, that the god who rules there is not cruel but necessary. Hades drew the shortest lot. He accepted his fate. He descended into the dark and built a kingdom there, and he ruled it with more justice and integrity than any of the gods who remained in the light. He did not beg for worship. He did not demand gratitude. He simply did his duty, day after day, receiving the uncountable dead, ensuring that the boundary between life and death remained intact, that the natural order held. And we repaid him by turning him into a devil. If you enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe for more folklore, myths, and mysterious creatures. See you next time.